over many years, I suppose, in many different ways, we've all tried to address the different facets of the housing crisis, from everything from the rental market to social housing to, homelessness in and of itself in terms of emergency accommodation. We've been working on a motion for a while now, but last week then or the week before, we were quite struck by the work of Housing Action Now with the artists, and also in collaboration with people who are most affected by the policies of governments past and I suppose policy going forward too. So to give context, I suppose, to people listening to what I'm going to contribute today it's just imagine for a moment all them times, say, we've watched apologies or we've watched acknowledgements of things that have happened in the past, and how people have been so negatively impacted by different crises over the years and different negative outcomes of policy over decades. And I suppose what I want people to imagine is for a moment that if I were the Taoiseach, or if you were the Taoiseach, or if we were watching the 6 o'clock news, or if we were watching the Dáil, what that apology might look like and feel like. And as the civil engagement group, we've always strived to ensure that representation of minority voices, or of voices in general of civil society, are held on the record in the chamber, and to try and be the vehicle to bring those voices in. So I could have opened this motion today talking specifically about policy, and I'm sure everybody else will, but what I want to do is to imagine that apology and speak to the people directly. Housing is a human right, a basic human need, and I and many in power before me have failed in our roles to ensure that every individual living in this country has access to good, quality, secure and affordable homes. I'm sorry to the thousands of people on social housing lists in this country, to every adult and child in emergency accommodation in hotels, hostels and shelters, to every adult and child in direct provision, to those staying with friends and family, living in each other's back gardens and sleeping on couches, to those who have relocated miles from where they work, forced to spend hours a day commuting, to those paying extortionate rents, and to those who can't afford to save for a mortgage, to those in negative equity, to the older people who remortgage to help someone else secure a home, to the young people who are stuck in parents' homes or who've made a decision to emigrate, to the traveller community whose nomadic way of life has been criminalised, to those disabled people, regardless of their impairments, who cannot secure an appropriate home to meet their needs, to those in abusive relationships who can't leave because of the fear that they will be on the street, and to those living on our nation's streets, and to those who have died on our streets, I stand before you today to give you the apology that you deserve. To Brendan, who feels like he is living on a trapdoor with a rope around his neck, at the mercy of landlords who ignore complaints about filthy carpets and broken showers, cold water and cold air howling through the cracked windows. Landlords who hike up the rent when they are challenged about the mould that is growing as fast as his children. Landlords who finally issue an eviction notice, leaving Brendan and his family 48 days to rearrange their lives. Brendan questions his decision to have come back from his life abroad, to bring his partner and children to the city he grew up in the country of 100,000 welcomes. To Alia, whose family received an eviction notice months before her leaving cert. Her studying time was replaced with hours on the phone trying to find a room for 3 children and 2 adults. Alia spent every evening in the library making use of the Wi-Fi, but one night she missed her curfew to study for her science exam and was put in a hostel room with 8 strangers. She was scared and shaking and saw someone overdose. Alia blames herself for getting lost in her study that evening, and she now talks to her sisters once a week. To Kevin, who was living in a hub and planning to kill himself, no longer able to cope with the size of the room once the new cot had been set up. The intensity of living with a pregnant partner, the smell of the food from the canteen where they had to eat, the stress, the worry, wondering, will this ever get better? Kept alive by the love he has for his baby daughter in her tiny little shoes, not wanting to leave her there and never wanting her to know she was born in a hub. To Mary, who only wants a safe haven, a place to hang the framed picture of her boy on his first day of school with his blue glasses and snowy white hair. She's been on the housing list for her son's whole life. She checks once a week online, praying that she has moved up the list. But her number has only moved once in 3 years. Mary was given the options to go homeless, go into emergency accommodation, or take an apartment with a kick door and a gang selling drugs outside. Lonely and isolated, Mary feels like she is being dumped in hell and forgotten. To David, who is no longer young and who misses his hurley stick which is in his parents' house here in Ireland, while he lives abroad. He wants to come back but can't afford to live on his own and is depressed at the prospect of a house share at his age, feeling trapped outside the high wall that is being built around affordable housing and missing family conversations and puckabouts and the smell of cut grass. To Paddy, who remembers the New Year's Eve party that he and his wife were at when someone explained the term negative equity. And now in mortgage arrears every year on his children's birthday, Paddy accounts another year in debt and wishes that death a happy birthday. He is haunted by the memory of the day that he and his wife realised that they can't afford to have another child. And he has got used to seeing his wife cry for that child. Paddy finally told his wife about his idea to kill himself and heard she had a similar idea. He often finds himself returning to his childhood memories so that he can recall what a secure home feels like. And I think it's just important to remember that each and every contribution here today is an actual real life story contributed to this project. And I think it's something we should continue to think about when we speak about policy, because sometimes when you get lost in the policy, it can be a cold instrument. And it's always better to remember what that policy means in real life terms. Thank you.
Senator Fhloinn. Do you formally second the motion?
Sorry?
Do you formally move to second the motion?
I do, yeah. I second.
Okay, that's fine.
Following on from Senator Lynn remarks, just to go straight into the ones that we have here. To Lizzie, who values the winter conversations at the open fire with people coming from all parts of the Houghton site for cups of teas and chats by her father's lamp. Lizzie loves traveller culture, but it's not part of traveller culture to live without basic human needs. No one should have to take the ice off the inside of the trailer window before sending your children to school. Living with bad lungs and lower life expectancy. All Lizzie wants is the best facilities for her community and not to see them forced into mainstream housing as a housing policy that facilitates all walks of life. But now Lizzie is being asked to move and leave behind years of memories because the nearby people in the nearby in the apartments don't like the view. To Claire, who has spent so much time scanning ads online for apartments that claim to be accessible, but only allows a wheelchair user in the door, and don't consider the need to move inside, or have a shower, or have a room for a couch for guests, or have a nearby bus stop to get to work. Claire was excited to finally secure an apartment in the city that was actually accessible, but now all she feels is stress as she pays her rent but can't move in because there is no personal assistant support available to her. Claire cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel. To Raphael, who is constantly looking for a place to live, who has slept in overcrowded housing, who has slept on friends' couches and on floors. His doctor told him to find a better place to live for the sake of his health. But where can you go? He wonders, how are you supposed to get reference if you spent half your life living in direct provision? He is tired of potential landlords being more interested in the fact that he is black rather than the fact that he's a healthcare worker, a student, a youth worker, a youth mentor, and he's just tired of always moving around, and he wants to feel a sense of belonging, wishing there was a sense of humanity in our housing system. Raphael just wants to be free. To the children who spent year after year in emergency accommodation, they were robbed of many milestones, and memories, sorry, can I just do this one again? To the children who have spent year after year in emergency accommodation, their childhood robbed for many milestones and memories they should have had. The children who's absorbing their parents' anxiety. The children commuting to school each day like worn-out adults. The children who don't have a table to eat breakfast or do homework. And to Paula, who's talking to you all now, she's spent 15 years on the council waiting list. 13 of those years spent in rundown, overpriced accommodation. And until a small electrical fire caused by a storage heater left her and her children homeless. I want to acknowledge her pain and suffering. There is a view out there that many people in this country are failing, and the situations they find themselves in is entirely the result of their own decisions. But that's not true. I want to make something very clear here today, and I would and to note for public records. Consecutive governments have failed you. It is not your fault. The truth is that the current housing crisis is a result of many policies, decisions at the highest level. We failed to bring rent regulation and proper tenants' rights. And we lost the sight of every person's basic need for a safe and secure home. And for that, I just want to say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Minister, for the 2 years, almost a year and a half that I've been here, we've spoke about housing many times, myself and you personally, and at the civil engagement group. I'm aware that the government, and I'm thankful, and so is the civil engagement group, that we have cross-party support here today. We are very grateful of that. However, we need, and our communities out there, outside of this house, need action. We don't need any more talk shops. And behind us, I'd like to formally welcome as well the Housing Action Group now. And this is what this government should do, and this is what we all of our responsibilities to do, is to put in action, not just the hearsay here today. We'll support because it sounds ever so lovely to support. We need to really be seen to be delivering for our children, for our traveller community, for our refugees, for our migrants, for all of our people, for our working class people, for our people who's just coming out of prison. Thank you, Minister, for taking the time out today to listen.
Thank you, Senator Flynn and Senator Ruane.
Now we've got Senator Alice Mary Higgins. You've got 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. We're usually, the civil engagement, we usually bring forward legislation and not motions, but we chose to bring a motion forward because we realised that we were coming again and again to the issue of housing through lots of different pieces of legislation, through lots of different policy debates. It's one that has been a core concern for everyone in Ireland, but for our group, particularly those who are most marginalised within the discussions on housing. Our very first PMB back in 2016, in the last Oireachtas, was a motion on housing and disability. Again, it is unfortunate that we still haven't delivered what we need, even though Ireland has now ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. In the years since then, the urgency that was in that motion, which again got cross-party support at that time, is all the more now. We 2017, with former Senator Grace O'Sullivan, we introduced the Derelict and Vacant Sites Bill 2017. And again, that bill, we were told there are strategies in place, don't worry, but yet we know and we see derelict and vacant sites become an ever hotter and ever more urgent issue. And again, I do welcome that government legislation has now been proposed by some of the government members, but it needs to be moved forward because back in 2017 we put those ideas on the table. And much has been lost in the interim, and time has been lost. When strategic housing developments and fast-track planning was proposed in 2017, we looked for use it or lose it clauses because they said they will treat this as speculation and won't build it unless they are required to. And that is what has happened. And at that same time, we looked for better protection from evictions, which we have then seen waves of evictions. And I say that not to say, you know, we've said these, but to point that these dots, these issues have been there for a while. They were there in the last Oireachtas, they're there in this Oireachtas, and we need to join them together into something that is a bigger picture of change. Reports on lone parents, which we had in the last Oireachtas, on the shocking alarm bells ringing on deprivation levels for lone parent families in Ireland, which it's not surprising that we see now that that is matching onto 53% of homeless families being headed by lone parents. And you know, the almost cognitive dissonance, which has an image of what Ireland's income, you know, what Ireland's incomes are, with what actually the incomes of most people are in Ireland. The fact that we have a huge income inequality is really important, and I think it has been unfortunate, and this is a deep debate we've had in this Oireachtas, has been that affordability has been attached to a market indicator rather than affordability being attached to what people actually can afford. All of these issues come together, and that's why we wanted this motion, is to recognise that we have had debates and indeed had support and back and forth with people on these issues, and that they call for a bigger picture. And the picture that they call from, and it's really important, and indeed Senator Moynihan put to it, it's not just doing a bit more, but it's about doing things differently. It's not about, you know, making progress or starting, you know, from where we were. It is because we have to acknowledge and recognise that we haven't necessarily always been doing things the right way. And one of the key areas, and that's why it's important here in our motion, is the financialisation of housing. We know that leasing is bad value for the state and creates perverse incentives. And it is disappointing, even in Housing for All, that we still see a reliance on, I think, over 2,600 houses through leasing schemes. That needs to be, and I know that people know the problems with leasing. But we also, it is disappointing that we see new contracts being signed, again, just this week with hotels in respect of direct provision. And I understand these are the measures that have been used. These are the emergency measures. These are the kind of the fig leaves, but they've been used for a long time. And what we need to understand, if we're going to really address this, is that, in fact, the market's goals and the state's goals are not necessarily aligned. Not only is, and this is why I think it's the most important line for me in the whole motion, and it's an optimistic line, in fact, but it's also a challenging one. The line in our motion that says, it is within the capacity and means of the state to solve the housing crisis. It is within the capacity of the state. It is within the means, because we do have access to finance, and indeed with the fiscal rules currently suspended, we have access in a very different way than we ever had before. And it must be the state, not the state encouraging solutions to happen to the housing crisis, not the state incentivising actors within a property market in the hope that secure housing kind of falls out of that. It needs to be the state taking the lead, and again recognising that in fact there are times when the interests of property speculation, such as with REITs, such as with vulture funds, indeed in terms of the commercial rental sector, are not aligned and may be at odds with the needs of the public and that common good. And that we need to be willing, when it comes to those tension points, to choose the common good on that, to have rent go down, not be capped, but go down, to accept and seek a deflation in the property market rather than a propping up of it indefinitely. The motion we heard today, the statement from a future minister, or from any minister for housing, was a statement about taking responsibility and putting on the record that we know the picture of what it is in Ireland and that we take responsibility. But let's not be, we don't want to be in a position of taking responsibility and further apologies in the future. We want to be in the position of taking responsibility right now as elected decision makers and saying we will use every year, every week and every month of the time we have in office and that you have in government to try to progress it. That is the more positive, more optimistic way to take responsibility. And we have to place the state centre stage in that. We cannot in any way abdicate that responsibility. Minister, I hope that you can take ideas from this, really take ideas, really take the recommendations that are here and that bring them forward and level up our ambition as a state in relation to these issues. Thank you.